he drove them to a location that he thought no one would ever find them, to one of the oil tank batteries with which he was so familiar. He knew this was safe.
This is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled. The judge's words hang in a silent Colorado courtroom as photos of Shanann Watts and her daughters, Bella and Celeste, rest on an easel. Outside, the Anadarko oil site sits under a wide August sky, the derricks casting long shadows across the prairie grass. Earlier that week, Christopher Lee Watts stood on a neighbor's porch and told local TV he had no idea where his family went. He looks straight into the camera and lies. His voice cracks just enough to seem genuine. His hands gesture with manufactured concern. The performance is calculated, rehearsed, desperate. The masks come off quickly in this story. Christopher Lee Watts presents as a soft-spoken suburban father in Frederick, Colorado. He works the early shift at an oil company, rising before dawn to check well sites and monitor production levels. He smiles in family videos and posts about fitness on social media, documenting workouts and protein shakes with the dedication of someone building an image. His Facebook page shows birthday parties, family trips to the beach, and loving captions under photos of Shanann and the girls. Privately, his marriage is strained, stretched thin by arguments over money and the pressures of a third pregnancy. He is in an affair with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger, compartmentalizing his double life with chilling efficiency. Money is tight, the house is in financial trouble, credit cards are maxed, and the facade of suburban success is crumbling. On August 13th, 2018, he strangles his pregnant wife, Shanann, in their bedroom after she returns from a business trip to Arizona. He smothers 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste in their beds, then drives their bodies to his worksite in the pre-dawn darkness. The case becomes notorious, not just for the murders themselves, but because he tries for 2 agonizing days to perform concern on camera while evidence closes around him like a vice. Born in Spring Lake, North Carolina in 1985, Watts grows up in a family that appears ordinary on the surface. There is no documented record of childhood violence, no early brushes with the law, no red flags that predict what comes later. The relationship with Shanann begins with optimism and genuine affection when they meet in North Carolina in 2010. They marry and relocate to Colorado for his job in the oil industry. By the summer of 2018, the couple is arguing frequently about debt, about Shanann's multi-level marketing business, about the strain of raising 2 young daughters and preparing for a 3rd child. He is having an affair that begins in June 2018 and quickly intensifies. He compartmentalizes with ease, lying to both women, maintaining separate narratives. His early warning signs are not assaults or threats, but secrecy, lies, and a sudden emotional withdrawal that friends and Shanann's family notice in the weeks before the murders. He stops wearing his wedding ring. He grows cold and distant. The path to the murders runs through a night-long argument after Shanann returns from a business trip on August 13th. The turning point is his choice to convert a domestic crisis into annihilation and cover up at his place of work. He chooses extinction over honesty. The crime sequence is compact and calculated, executed in the dark hours before a Monday workday begins. Shanann is strangled in the bedroom shortly before dawn, her body still warm when he carries it to the truck. Bella and Celeste are murdered next, smothered with such force that their faces bear the marks. He loads the bodies into his work truck, a white Dodge, and drives 45 minutes to an Anadarko petroleum site in rural Weld County, where he works as an operator. At the remote location, surrounded by pump jacks and sagebrush, he stuffs the girls into separate 8-inch oil tanks filled with crude, their small bodies forced through narrow hatches. He buries Shanann in a shallow grave nearby, covering her with dirt and rocks in a location he knows from his daily rounds. His evasion starts immediately. He sends texts to friends asking if they've seen Shanann, calls a co-worker to establish an alibi, and agrees to interviews on the porch with local news crews. The method is intimate and hands-on, requiring physical proximity and deliberate force. The most disturbing detail is not only the filicide, but the cold decision to use his job site to hide his daughters in oil tanks to delay decomposition and discovery. He thinks the oil will dissolve the evidence. He is wrong. Investigators are skeptical from the start, their instincts honed by years of experience with family violence. A neighbor's exterior security camera shows movement inconsistent with his story. Footage of Watts loading something heavy into his truck in the early morning hours. He volunteers for a polygraph test, confident he can pass, and fails spectacularly. The examiner notes his physiological responses spike with each denial. Cell phone and GPS data place him at the oil tanks at the exact time he claims to be elsewhere. Cadaver dogs alert inside the house and near the truck. He breaks during questioning at the Frederick Police Department, his story collapsing under the weight of evidence. He confesses first to killing Shanann, claiming he did so after watching her strangle the girls on a baby monitor, a lie investigators immediately recognize. He breaks further and admits to killing all three. Arrest comes within days, on August 15, 2018, after a search at the oil site recovers the bodies in conditions that devastate even veteran investigators. He looks deflated in the booking photo, the performance over, the mask discarded. There is no jury, no dramatic courtroom battle. In November 2018, Christopher Watts pleads guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. The plea deal spares him the death penalty, but guarantees he will never walk free. The judge, Marcelo Kopkow, calls it perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime of his career, a statement that carries weight in a jurisdiction that has seen its share of violence. Family members speak through tears and rage. "I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them," Shanann's father, Frank Razuchek, says during the hearing, his voice breaking. Shanann's mother, Sandra Razuchek, tells Watts she prays he hears his daughter's voices in prison every day for the rest of his life. Watts receives 5 life sentences without parole, plus additional years for the other charges, a sentence that amounts to several lifetimes behind bars. He is moved from Colorado to an out-of-state facility for safety reasons after receiving threats from other inmates. He is housed in protective custody at Dodge Correctional Institution in Walpen, Wisconsin, where he will spend decades in isolation. The case spawns a major Netflix documentary, American Murder: The Family Next Door, which uses Shanann's own social media footage to tell the story. Hours of news analysis, true crime podcasts, and continuing public interest follow because the deception played out on camera and collapsed in days. The world watched a father lie about his missing family and then watched the truth obliterate those lies. What flips a suburban father from ordinary to executioner? The answer here is banal power, control over an intimate sphere, a fantasy of erasing consequences, and the belief that his story could outrun the facts. He wanted a new life with his mistress and saw his family as obstacles rather than human beings. The mask drops. A precedent looms.
He made very elaborate plans to carry out the killings in a serial fashion. He did not want 2 of the...
In New Jersey, almost half a century earlier, another father killed everyone under his roof and vanished for 18 years. The organ music plays throughout the empty Westfield mansion, Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, echoing through 19 silent rooms. 5 bodies lie arranged on sleeping bags in the ballroom, a grotesque parody of a family camping trip. Upstairs, the matriarch is covered with a towel in her bed, her apartment sealed and cold. For nearly a month, the house will sit silent with the lights on and the thermostat turned down to slow decomposition. Classical music plays on a loop, audible to neighbors who assume the List family is simply eccentric. John Emil List, accountant, Lutheran, and former bank vice president, is already gone, driving west toward a new identity. Years later, he says, on television, in the calm tones of a man discussing a business decision, that he wanted to spare his family shame and assure their souls a place in heaven. The words are chilling in their certainty. John Emil List seems like a conservative provider in suburban New Jersey in 1971, the kind of man neighbors nod to but never really know. He wears dark suits, attends church faithfully, and speaks in the formal cadences of a previous generation. Privately, he is unemployed for months, sinking in debt that grows exponentially, and rigidly religious to the point of pathology. On November 9th, 1971, he shoots his wife Helen, his mother Alma, and his 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, inside their 19-room Victorian home at 431 Hillside Avenue. The house itself is a monument to overreach, purchased during better times, now a financial albatross draining his mother's savings. The case is famous because of its meticulous planning. The 5-page letter to his pastor explaining his theology of murder, and the long disappearance that ends only when a sculptor's age-progressed bust airs on a national TV show, and a tipster recognizes the face. Born in Bay City, Michigan in 1925, List grows up in a strict Lutheran household where faith is enforced with rigidity and punishment. His mother, Alma, dominates his childhood, setting standards he spends his life trying to meet. He serves in World War II and the Korean War, earns an accounting degree, and marries Helen Taylor in 1951. For years the marriage functions, producing 3 children and the appearance of stability. He works as a bank vice president and accountant, moving the family to New Jersey in the 1960s. By 1971, he has lost his job at a bank in Jersey City and is hiding the truth from everyone, leaving each morning as if going to work, spending days at the public library, reading newspapers, and avoiding reality. He writes checks on his mother's account without permission and drains funds from Patricia's savings for her theater lessons, yet demands absolute piety at home. He forbids modern music, monitors his children's activities, and lectures them on sin and salvation. He tells a pastor later, during interviews from prison, that his wife's alcoholism and his daughter's interest in drama were leading the family to damnation, souls slipping toward hell that only he could save. The trajectory tightens around money, pride, and theological rationalization. The turning point is the decision to script not just murder, but an entire domestic exit, a total erasure of his failure. The murders occur across a school day, timed with the precision of a military operation. He shoots his wife Helen in the kitchen around 9 a.m. as she drinks her morning coffee, a single bullet to the head. He climbs the back stairs to his mother's 3rd-floor apartment and shoots her as she prepares lunch. Later that afternoon, he shoots his daughter Patricia, 16, as she arrives home from school, then his sons John Jr., 15, and Frederick, 13, as they enter through the front door in succession. He drags 4 of the bodies to the ballroom, lays them on sleeping bags, covers them carefully, and places them in a row. He leaves a 5-page confession letter to his pastor, Eugene Raywinkle, explaining that he killed them to save their souls from the corrupting influence of the world. He turns on every light in the house to suggest occupancy. He lowers the thermostat to preserve the bodies. He stops mail and milk deliveries with fabricated stories about a family trip to North Carolina. He lets the organ music play to suggest life within. He abandons the family car at John F. Kennedy International Airport to create a false trail, then boards a bus and begins life as Robert P. Clark, an accountant who will live quietly in Denver and later in Virginia. He remarries in 1985. He resumes church-going, becoming an active member of his new congregation. The most chilling element is the calm orderliness, a man moving through rooms with the detachment of someone balancing a ledger, crossing off line items, closing accounts. The investigation stalls for nearly 2 decades, one of the longest fugitive cases in American history. The house is discovered only when neighbors notice the lights burning out one by one and the music finally stopping after nearly a month. Police enter on December 7, 1971, and find a scene of Gothic horror. The letter to Pastor Raywinkle explains motive in theological terms, but provides no clue to whereabouts. Investigators chase dead ends and false sightings across the country. The trail grows cold. The case file gathers dust. In 1989, the television show America's Most Wanted airs the case as part of its mission to catch fugitives. Forensic artist Frank Bender creates a clay bust showing what List might look like at age 63, with receding hairline, large glasses, and the jowls of age. The sculpture is uncanny in its accuracy, based on aging science and intuition. A former neighbor in Richmond, Virginia, named Wanda Flannery, watches the show and recognizes Bob Clark from her church. She calls the hotline. FBI agents verify the tip. A fingerprint match links Clark to List definitively. On June 1st, 1989, authorities arrest him at work at a Richmond accounting firm. He denies his identity at first, insisting they have the wrong man, then admits the truth when confronted with fingerprint evidence. His 1990 trial in Union County, New Jersey, centers on the questions of premeditation and sanity. The defense argues extreme religious delusion, painting List as a man whose mind snapped under financial and spiritual pressure, but the jury sees a methodical plan executed over hours. Cut phone lines, staggered killings, timed to the school day, the letter drafted in advance, the travel arrangements, the new identity waiting. He is convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder after the jury deliberates for less than a day. He receives 5 consecutive life sentences, meaning he must serve a minimum of 5 lifetimes before even being considered for parole. He shows little emotion during sentencing, his face as blank as it was during the murders. On ABC's 2020, in interviews conducted years later, he repeats calmly that he intended to save his family from worldly shame and believed they would thank him in heaven. John Emil List dies in prison in Trenton, New Jersey on March 21, 2008, at age 82, having served 18 years behind bars. His case becomes a media template for the family annihilator: order, planning, erasure, reinvention. Books, documentaries, and true crime podcasts dissect his psychology for decades. The lesson is austere and uncomfortable. He used faith as a frame for control and murder, weaponizing religion to justify the unjustifiable. Was this fanaticism as alibi or as engine? Theology gave him language and structure, but money and pride seemed to drive the hand that pulled the trigger. The suburban facade held until it didn't, and when it collapsed, he chose to destroy the evidence rather than face the consequences. The next case shows what happens when myth swallows the murders themselves, when a horror franchise eclipses the real victims.
They say he killed his mother and father, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters. Ronald DeFeo, now 40 years old, has been in jail ever since that horror in
You got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot. It is late on November 13th, 1974, and Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr. burst into Henry's Bar on Merrick Road in Amityville, New York, his eyes wild and his voice panicked. He tells the bartender and patrons that something terrible has happened at his house. Police race to 112 Ocean Avenue, a large Dutch colonial with distinctive quarter-moon windows that will become infamous. They find 6 bodies inside. Parents Ronald Sr., 43, and Louise, 42, and 4 children, Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, and John Matthew, 9, lying face down in their beds, each shot with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. The crime scene is eerily quiet, the victims positioned uniformly, no signs of struggle, as if they never woke. The house will later become a horror franchise, the setting for claims of demonic possession and supernatural terror that spawn books, films, and endless debate. But the real horror happens tonight, in the hands of the eldest son. Ronald DeFeo Jr., known as Butch, is 23 years old, a young man with a violent temper and a growing drug problem. Publicly, he is a son in a hard-driving, status-conscious family on Long Island, a family that projects success through their large home and new cars. Privately, he is volatile and dangerous, using heroin and LSD regularly, clashing violently with his father and spiraling into paranoia and rage. In one night, he kills his entire immediate family with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle he knows well, moving from room to room with deadly efficiency. The case is notorious because the murders become a backdrop for the best-selling Amityville horror myth, a fabricated tale of hauntings that distorts and obscures the true crime at the center. Real people died here. Their deaths deserve more than being props in a ghost story. DeFeo is born in Brooklyn in 1951 and grows up in a turbulent household marked by screaming arguments and physical violence. Accounts from family members and friends describe constant battles between father and son, with Ronald Sr. using intimidation and beatings to control his eldest child. Butch becomes a problem teen early, getting expelled from school for violent outbursts and poor behavior. He drinks heavily, uses drugs openly, and flashes guns to friends as a form of intimidation and bravado. He works sporadically at his grandfather's car dealership, but is unreliable and often high. The path to the murders is not subtle or hidden. He acquires the rifle months before and speaks darkly to acquaintances about wanting to kill his family, comments dismissed as drug talk. The turning point is the movement from threat to action in the early hours of November 13th, when resentment and rage finally overwhelm whatever restraint he once possessed. Sometime after 3 a.m., DeFeo walks through the house room to room and fires at close range, executing his family as they sleep. The ballistic pattern is straightforward and methodical. The questions begin with the odd quiet of the house and the uniform positions of the victims, all found face down as if they never stirred. Some investigators speculate drugs or sedatives, though none are found. He showers afterward, carefully discarding bloody clothes in a storm drain. He goes to work at the dealership as if nothing happened, maintaining normalcy for hours. That evening, he stages a discovery at Henry's bar, running in with manufactured panic, leading others back to the scene. Police quickly find inconsistencies in his story. His claim of an intruder doesn't match the lack of forced entry, the absence of theft, the intimate knowledge required to find each victim in the dark. His initial intruder story collapses within 24 hours into a confession, then shifts again into a changing series of accounts over the years that never undo the central fact. He shot 6 members of his family in their beds while they slept. The most disturbing element is the clean, linear finality of the sequence, the execution-style precision, the absence of mercy. Detectives connect the rifle to DeFeo through registration records and witness accounts. Statements shift and contradict under questioning. He confesses within a day, admitting to the killings, but claiming he heard voices commanding him, building an insanity defense before he even has a lawyer. The case is solved as directly and quickly as it was committed. The physical evidence is overwhelming. The confession is recorded. The trial is a formality. In October 1975, a jury convicts him on 6 counts of second-degree murder after rejecting his insanity plea. The jury deliberates for less than a day. He receives 6 concurrent 25 to life sentences, meaning he becomes eligible for parole after 25 years. Insanity claims are rejected by the jury, who hear psychiatric testimony on both sides and conclude he knew exactly what he was doing. "I don't think I'm crazy," he says in one jailhouse interview years later, a statement that aligns with the jury's verdict. The court does not disagree. He becomes eligible for parole in the late 1990s and is denied repeatedly at hearings where victims' family members speak against his release. Ronald DeFeo Jr. dies in custody at Albany Medical Center on March 12, 2021, at age 69, having served 46 years in prison. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue sells and resells multiple times, each transaction shadowed by its history. Books and films fixate on hauntings and demonic lore, most famously the Amityville horror book by Jay Anson and the 1979 film, both later proven to be largely fabricated by the Lutz family who briefly lived there. The real victims, Ronald Sr., Louise, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew, become scenery for a ghost story, their deaths commercialized and distorted. The legacy belongs to 6 people killed in their sleep, not to the marketing machinery that exploited their deaths. Why do myths overtake the dead? Supernatural fiction feels safer and more palatable than confronting a son who exterminates his family in cold blood. Ghosts are easier to process than human evil. Strip away the ghost lights and demonic claims, and you confront the quiet of a hallway and a rifle in the dark, wielded by someone who should have protected the victims, not destroyed them. The lens widens west. In Oregon, 4 bodies surface along the coast, and the husband is already gone, living under a stolen name in a Mexican beach town.
His parents didn't think he was ready to date.
They gave me an ultimatum at that point. They said I was still fairly adamant that I wanted to date Mary Jane, and they essentially said you can...
Foam curls at the edge of an Oregon inlet, the Pacific grey and cold in December. A suitcase bobs near the shore, caught in the rocks and seaweed. Inside are the bodies of 2 small children, their faces still recognizable despite the water. Christian Michael Longo, 27, is already south of the border, drinking beer on a Cancun beach, flirting with tourists, and introducing himself as Michael Finkel, a New York Times journalist whose identity he stole from a magazine cover. In court, months later, the judge will look at the evidence and call the facts a level of perfidy beyond anything I have ever experienced. The word perfidy, betrayal of trust, fits perfectly. Christian Longo cultivates charm with the practiced ease of a lifelong salesman. He is a stylish young father from Michigan, always well-dressed, quick with a smile, articulate and confident. He is a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses faith community, a seemingly devoted husband and father who quotes scripture and attends meetings. Privately, he is forging checks, stealing cars and identities, lying compulsively about money, and constructing an ever more elaborate web of deception. In December 2001, 4 bodies appear along the central Oregon coast. His wife, Mary Jane, 34, and their children, Zachary, 4, Sadie, 3, and Madison, 2. The case becomes known internationally for the Mexico flight, the stolen identity of New York Times reporter Michael Finkel, who later writes a book about the experience, and the 2015 film True Story, starring Jonah Hill and James Franco. But beneath the media spectacle is a story of domestic annihilation driven by vanity, debt, and narcissism. Born in Iowa in 1974, Longo grows up in a religious household and presents as bright and capable from an early age. As a teenager, he learns to appear polished and confident, skills he uses to navigate social situations and later to manipulate. Early warning signs are financial, not violent, frauds, thefts, forged documents, and a fixation on maintaining a lifestyle he cannot afford. He and Mary Jane marry young within the faith community. By 2001, he is moving his family frequently, from Michigan to Ohio to Oregon, always one step ahead of creditors, landlords, and law enforcement. He borrows money from relatives with elaborate stories, maxes out credit cards in others' names, and leaves a trail of bad checks. The path to murder passes through an obsession with appearances at all costs, with maintaining the facade of success even as everything collapses. The turning point is the decision to erase the family rather than face the accumulated weight of financial collapse, legal consequences, and communal exposure within his faith community. In mid-December 2001, Mary Jane is strangled in the family's rented condominium in Newport, Oregon. Her body is later found weighted down in Lintslaw near the Embarcadero Resort Marina. 4-year-old Zachary and 3-year-old Sadie are found stuffed into suitcases submerged in the Fee o Swolvum. Same area, their small bodies folded to fit. 2-year-old Madison's body is recovered later from Alsea Bay, also weighted. The timeline suggests the murders happen over a day or two. Longo flees immediately to Mexico, withdrawing cash, using Mary Jane's van to reach the border, then ditching it and flying to Cancun. In Mexico, he passes himself off as Mike Finkel, using the real journalist's name after seeing his byline in a magazine. He drinks beer on the beach, pursues romantic relationships with European tourists, and shows no outward signs of guilt or grief. The most disturbing details are the deliberateness of the drownings, the methodical disposal in waters he knows from living in the area, and the calculated choice to use weighted suitcases to delay discovery and decomposition. The investigation moves quickly once the bodies are discovered. law enforcement identifies the children first through fingerprints and dental records. A nationwide alert goes out for Longo and Mary Jane. The FBI coordinates with Mexican authorities. The FBI adds Longo to its 10 most wanted list on January 11, 2002, publicizing his photo and aliases. Tips begin pouring in. One places him definitively in Cancun, where he is staying at a youth hostel and using an internet cafe. Mexican authorities arrest him at the hostel on January 13, 2002. He surrenders without a fight, almost relieved to be caught. Back in Oregon, prosecutors prepare a capital murder case with meticulous care. In 2003, after a trial that grips the state, a jury convicts Longo of 4 counts of aggravated murder for killing Mary Jane and their 3 children. The evidence is overwhelming. Forensic pathology, the suitcases traced to purchases he made, his flight, and the stolen identity, financial records showing motive. The judge, at sentencing, uses the word perfidy, and the word resonates through the courtroom. Longo shows little emotion, maintaining the calm demeanor he has displayed throughout. He is sentenced to death and transferred to Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. In later years, he mounts a public campaign to donate his organs upon execution, writing essays and giving interviews about the ethics of death row organ donation, a campaign that ignites national debate but does not alter his sentence or standing. As of 2025, Christian Longo remains on Oregon's death row, housed in solitary confinement, his execution delayed by the state's ongoing moratorium on capital punishment. The story becomes a book by the real Michael Finkel, titled True Story, Murder Memoir, Mea Culpa, exploring the strange relationship between journalist and killer. A 2015 film adaptation stars Jonah Hill as Finkel and James Franco as Longo. The cultural echo is a reminder. Charisma plus pathological deceit can mask lethal intent until it's too late. Is this narcissism, desperation, or both working in lethal tandem? Annihilation here is an extension of fraud. A forged life ending in a forged identity. A man who lies so easily that murder becomes just another deception to manage. The next case shows a murderous patriarchy operating like a private cult behind a city's front doors, a regime of control that ends in slaughter.
Marcus Wesson convinced his family that he was God, that Jesus was a vampire.
Every chilling detail is still fresh for defense attorney Ralph Torres.
Police hold a perimeter outside a cramped Fresno home on March 12, 2004. The afternoon sun beating down on a residential street that has never seen this level of law enforcement presence. Family members shout and struggle against officers, desperate to reach children they know are inside. Voices rise in panic and pleading. Minutes later, officers breach the door and find a slaughter they will call the worst in the city's history. 9 children are dead in a back bedroom, their bodies stacked and intertwined. The patriarch, Marcus DeLon Wesson, emerges from the house in blood-stained clothes, his long graying hair and beard giving him the appearance of a disheveled prophet. Fresno's future mayor, then police chief Jerry Dyer, later says, publicly, it is the worst mass murder in the history of our city, a statement that still holds weight decades later. Marcus Wesson projects as a reclusive father with many children, a man who keeps to himself and homeschools his large family. The private truth is a decades-long regime of incest, isolation, extreme religious indoctrination, and coercive control that turns a household into a prison. In a single day, he murders 9 of his children and grandchildren, many born from systematic sexual abuse of his own daughters. The case horrifies the nation because it combines filicide with a quasi-religious totalitarian structure built specifically to hide and enable abuse over many years. Born in 1946 in Kansas, Wesson grows up under a violent, alcoholic father who beats him regularly. He joins the military and serves in the U.S. Army, then drifts through California, working odd jobs and presenting as deeply religious. The early warning signs are not merely controlling behavior, but criminal sexual conduct that begins in the 1970s. He grooms girls inside the family sphere, forces them into spiritual marriages, and teaches that he is a divine figure whose commands must be obeyed without question. He preaches apocalyptic beliefs drawn from a distorted mix of Christianity and his own invented theology. He teaches children that he is their God, that the outside world is evil, that death is preferable to separation from him. The path culminates in a custody confrontation at the Fresno home on West Hammond Avenue involving adult relatives who have escaped his control and are demanding the return of children still trapped inside. On March 12, 2004, in a back room crowded with old crates, clothing, and religious texts, Wesson shoots 9 children and young people ranging in age from 1 to 17. The exact sequence remains contested by survivors who testify, and defense claims that attempt to shift blame, but a jury later convicts him of personally killing all 9. The method is close quarters gunshots, execution style, a .22 caliber handgun fired at point blank range. The pattern is patriarchal absolutism taken to its ultimate extreme. A man who treats human beings as property to be eliminated when his absolute control is threatened by outside intervention. The most disturbing element is the fusion of decades of sexual abuse, religious manipulation, and filicide, all under a banner of divine authority and family loyalty. Police arrive for what begins as a civil dispute over custody, relatives demanding children be returned to their mothers. Officers negotiate for hours, trying to resolve the situation peacefully, unaware of what is happening in the back room. When they finally enter, after hearing no response, they discover the bodies stacked in a horrifying pile in the bedroom. Ballistics analysis, survivor testimony from daughters who escaped years earlier, and physical evidence all contradict Wesson's later attempts to deflect responsibility or claim one of the older children acted. He is arrested at the scene, calm and detached, showing no emotion even as officers process the carnage. In 2005, after a trial that lasts months and involves devastating testimony from survivors, a Fresno County jury convicts Wesson of 9 counts of first-degree murder and multiple sex offenses, including rape and molestation spanning decades. The evidence is overwhelming and deeply disturbing. He is sentenced to death and transferred to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. The courtroom is filled with tension and grief. Survivors speak of a childhood built entirely on fear, control, and abuse. One daughter, testifying, later says on national television, "I wished I could disappear. I wished I could die rather than live that life." The victims are Illabel Carruthers, 1. Aviv Wesson, 1. Jonathan Wesson, 1. Ethan St. Laurent, 4. Sedona Wesson, 4. Marshy St. Laurent, 7. Jeva St. Laurent, 8. Sabrina Wesson, 17, and Lise Wesson, 17. As of 2025, Marcus Wesson remains on California's death row at San Quentin, his execution indefinitely delayed by the state's moratorium on capital punishment. The case is used extensively in law enforcement training and in public discourse on coercive control, incest crimes, and the dynamics of closed family systems. It stands as a rare, catastrophic convergence of patriarchal abuse and mass filicide within a single household, a case study in how totalitarian control can function hidden within a residential neighborhood. Why does a closed system breed annihilation? When one person's will is absolute law, enforced by violence and theology, dissent becomes treason, and treason is punishable by death. The outside world becomes the enemy, and any threat to control becomes an existential crisis. Next, the blast of a Scottsdale house engineered to erase a marriage and 2 children, and the father who vanishes into the Arizona mesas and is never found.
A father accused of killing his wife and kids and then blowing up their Scottsdale home.
And disappearing. Robert Fisher has been on the run for 20 years.
The house on North 74th Place in Scottsdale erupts in a fireball before dawn on April 10, 2001, the explosion rattling windows blocks away and lighting the pre-dawn sky orange. Fire crews arrive within minutes to find a blast crater where a family home once stood, flames still consuming what remains of the structure. Inside the ruins, once the fire is controlled and investigators can enter, are the bodies of Mary Fisher, 38, shot in the back of the head and carefully posed on the bed, and two children, Brittany, 12, and Bobby, 10, their throats cut with such violence that investigators know immediately this was personal. Gas lines were deliberately pulled from the walls. The ignition was timed to coincide with the morning routine of neighbors, maximizing chaos. Detective John Heinzelman, a veteran of the Scottsdale Police Department, calls it, by far, the most heinous crime I've ever seen in Scottsdale. Robert William Fisher is gone, vanished into the desert. Publicly, Fisher is a family man, an avid hunter and outdoorsman who works as a surgical catheter technician, a man who keeps to himself but seems competent and stable. Privately, according to investigators, friends, and later analysis, he is rigid, controlling, prone to explosive anger, and terrified of divorce in a way that borders on pathological. Over one night, he destroys his family and tries to destroy all evidence with a house-leveling explosion designed to incinerate forensic clues. The case is famous because Robert William Fisher remains a fugitive for decades, one of the FBI's most wanted men, a ghost haunting the Southwest. Robert William Fisher is born in Brooklyn, New York in 1961 and grows up moving frequently as a child when his family relocates to Arizona. His parents divorce when he is a young teenager, a trauma he later tells friends shaped his worldview and his fierce opposition to divorce in his own marriage. He joins the Navy, serves honorably, and marries Mary Cooper, a woman he meets in the mid-1980s. They build a home in Scottsdale defined by his strict rules. No disorder, no defiance, children raised with discipline. Friends later describe arguments that turn explosive, his refusal to consider separation even when the marriage deteriorates, and his statements that he would rather see the family dead than divorced. Early warning signs include volatile arguments witnessed by neighbors, a fear of humiliation that manifests as rage, and repeated statements that divorce is moral failure he will never accept. The path to April 2001 runs through escalating marital conflict, Mary's exploration of separation, and his absolute need to maintain control over the narrative and the outcome. Sometime late on April 9th or early on April 10th, Mary is shot in the back of the head as she sleeps, killed instantly. Brittany and Bobby are murdered by knife, their throats cut in an act of intimate violence that requires proximity and force. Fisher then methodically pulls natural gas lines from appliances throughout the house, opens valves to flood the structure with gas, and sets either a candle timer or a spark device designed to ignite the vapor after he leaves. The house explodes around 8:42 a.m., a blast so powerful it destroys the structure and damages neighboring homes. He leaves in the family's Toyota 4Runner, driving north toward the mountains. ATM footage from a Scottsdale bank shows a man strongly resembling him withdrawing cash on April 10th. The vehicle is later found abandoned near the town of Young, Arizona, near the Tonto National Forest, a vast wilderness Fisher knows well from hunting trips. The most disturbing detail is the blend of intimate violence, the shooting, the knife work, with the calculated, almost theatrical demolition designed to erase all evidence and suggest an accident. Police connect the timelines quickly. Forensics confirm the explosion was deliberately set, not an accident. The bodies are recovered and autopsied, revealing they were killed before the blast. The vehicle is found days later near a forest trailhead, covered in dust, a single set of boot prints leading away into the wilderness. A bloodhound tracking team follows Fisher's scent to a wash several miles into the forest, then loses it. The FBI adds Fisher to the 10 most wanted list in June 2002, publicizing his photo, description, and known habits. Tips pour in from across the Southwest and, later, from as far as Canada, Central America, and even reports from overseas. None produce a confirmed sighting or capture. Age-progressed photos are released periodically. Billboards go up. The case remains frustratingly open. There is no trial, no conviction, no closure. A state warrant for 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson stands. Federal charges for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution are added. Investigators and Mary's family endure birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays without answers, without a body, without justice. In 2021, the FBI removes Fisher from the active top 10 most wanted list as part of routine turnover to make room for other cases, but the warrant remains active and the investigation technically open. The Scottsdale Police Department maintains a tip line. As of 2025, Robert William Fisher has never been found, despite being one of the most recognizable fugitives in American history. Age-progressed images released by the FBI imagine him with grey hair, a heavier face, possible plastic surgery. Theories range from suicide in the wilderness shortly after the murders to successful evasion and a new life under an assumed identity, possibly abroad. The story persists in true crime media because it is unresolved and because the crime scene was such an elaborate and violent attempt to burn away time and truth. What is worse, the blast or the silence that follows? Absence becomes a second violence, a theft of resolution and closure. The dead deserve justice, the living deserve answers. Neither has come. Across the Atlantic, another father turns faith into theatre and acid into a tool of erasure, dissolving bodies in a Brussels basement.
There are three houses, Rue van der Maan, hier Nijverheidskaai en dan...
CD que sont devenues les trois maisons de l'horreur.
A Belgian courtroom listens in horrified silence as an adult daughter, Agnes Pandy, describes years of murder in a house of prayer. The defendant, Hungarian-born pastor Andras Pandy, elderly and defiant, calls the proceedings a witch trial and insists he speaks to the missing family members through angels who tell him they are happy. The jury is unmoved, their faces grim as forensic experts describe remains dissolved in acid. 6 are confirmed dead. The acid has done its work, but not enough to hide the truth. Publicly, Pandy is a religious leader and teacher in Brussels, a man who fled communist Hungary and built a small following in Belgium's expatriate community. He teaches religion, quotes scripture, and presents as a devout Christian. Privately, he is a tyrant who controls and systematically abuses his family through violence, sexual assault, and isolation. Between 1986 and 1990, his wife and ex-wife and multiple children and stepchildren disappear without a trace. The case is highly unusual for its combination of incest, serial intrafamily killings, and body disposal by acid, a method revealed years later only when his daughter Agnes, tortured by guilt and fear, approaches authorities and confesses her forced participation under his domination. Born in 1927 in what is now Slovakia, then part of Hungary, Pandy grows up in the chaos of World War II and its aftermath. He emigrates to Belgium in the 1950s, seeking a better life in the West. He marries, has children, and builds a reputation as a religious teacher. Reports from later investigations describe strict household rules enforced with beatings, sexual abuse that begins when daughters are children, and a climate of absolute fear. Early warning signs are the disappearances themselves, family members vanishing one by one, explained away to neighbors and authorities with fabricated stories of sudden moves to Hungary, America, or other far-off countries. Relatives who ask questions are told the missing are fine, living new lives, not to be contacted. The path to the murders is systematic and chilling. Isolate the family from outside contact, abuse and control through violence and religion, eliminate those who resist or threaten exposure, replace them with new victims, repeat. Between 1986 and 1990, at least 6 family members are killed inside Pandy's home in Brussels. The victims are shot or bludgeoned, then dismembered in the bathtub. Bodies are dissolved in barrels of acid, kept in the basement, a process that takes weeks and fills the house with acrid chemical smells neighbors later recall. Some remains are disposed of in canals or buried. Others are simply flushed away as liquid. He uses religious language throughout to justify his absolute control, telling family members that God has given him authority over life and death. Agnes later testifies she acted under coercion and terror, helping dispose of bodies because she feared she would be next if she refused. Her confession in the late 1990s, given to authorities after years of psychological torment, breaks the case open. The most horrifying aspect is the bureaucratic, methodical banality of erasure. Paperwork forged to explain absences, stories crafted for each missing person, acid baths conducted as routine household tasks. Investigators reopen missing person files after Agnes approaches police in 1997, her story almost too horrific to believe. Forensic searches of the family home uncover bone fragments that survived the acid, traces of blood despite extensive cleaning, and barrels with chemical residue. DNA testing, where possible, matches remains to missing family members. Testimony from Agnes and surviving family members who escaped years earlier paints a picture of a household ruled by terror. An arrest warrant is issued for Andras Pandy in October 1997. He is taken into custody and held for trial. In 2002, after a trial that captivates and horrifies Belgium, a court convicts Andras Pandy of 6 murders, attempted murder, and multiple counts of rape and sexual abuse. The evidence is circumstantial in some areas, but overwhelming in totality. Forensic remains, testimony, the pattern of disappearances. He receives life imprisonment, the harshest sentence available under Belgian law. Throughout the trial and afterward, he continues to call the proceedings a religious persecution, claiming his family members are alive and that he is being punished for his faith. He never expresses remorse. Andras Pandy dies in prison in Merksplas, Belgium on November 9, 2013 at age 86, having served more than a decade behind bars. The case's cultural footprint is smaller than American counterparts, but its details are unforgettable to those who study family annihilation and coercive control. A pastor's religious authority became a license to annihilate, his theology twisted into a justification for incest and murder. Is belief the engine or merely the costume? Faith here is clearly a prop for power, its language and structure used to command absolute obedience and to silence questions about the missing. Now back to New England and a case that jumped the Atlantic before it landed in a Massachusetts courtroom, a father who killed his wife and infant daughter, then fled to England.
Found guilty of murder in the first degree, it is ordered by the court to be sentenced to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction for the term of life. On indictment number 2006.
Airport cameras at London's Heathrow catch a young British man moving quickly through the terminal, his face tense, his movements hurried. 2 days earlier, across the Atlantic in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, police responding to a worried call from family members found Rachel Entwistle, 27, and her 9-month-old daughter, Lillian Rose, shot to death in their bed, covered by blankets in a grotesque parody of sleep. The husband and father, Neil Entwistle, had already returned to England, fleeing the scene and the country within hours of the murders. At his sentencing years later, the judge will look at the defendant and say these murders defy comprehension, a statement that captures the court's struggle to understand a father who could end an infant's life. Neil Entwistle arrives in Massachusetts in 2005 with his American wife Rachel and their infant daughter Lillian, full of optimism about starting a new life and launching an internet business. Publicly, he is a well-educated IT professional with degrees from British universities, a soft-spoken man hoping to succeed in America. Privately, he is drifting in debt, unable to generate income, lying to Rachel about his business prospects, and spending significant time on escort websites and pornography. On January 20th, 2006, he shoots his wife and 9-month-old child with a .22 caliber handgun taken from his father-in-law's home. The case captivates audiences on both sides of the Atlantic because of the transatlantic flight, the extradition battle, the young victims, and the cold intimacy of a father murdering his own infant daughter in her crib. Born in Nottinghamshire, England, in 1978, Entwistle excels academically in school, studies electronics and electrical engineering at the University of York, and presents as intelligent and capable. He meets Rachel Souza, an American teacher at university, and they fall in love quickly. They marry in 2003, and initially live in England before deciding to relocate to the United States to be near Rachel's family in Massachusetts. The early warning signs are subtle and financial: stress over money, deception about the success of his online ventures, growing debt, and online searches that later appear as damning evidence in his computer history. Searches for how to kill with a knife and escort services conducted in the days before the murders. The path to murder includes borrowing a gun from his father-in-law, Joseph Matarazzo, under the pretense of target shooting, and forming a plan to leave the country immediately after the killings. The crime happens over the course of a single day, January 20th, 2006. Rachel is shot first as she lies in bed, the bullet entering behind her left ear. Then Neil Entwistle points the .22 caliber Colt revolver at his 9-month-old daughter Lillian and fires, killing her instantly. He covers both bodies with blankets, creating the appearance of sleep. He returns the weapon to his father-in-law's house, books a flight to London, using a credit card, and flees the country within 24 hours. The most disturbing detail, repeated by prosecutors and seared into the public consciousness, is the proximity and intimacy. A father ending an infant's life with a gun taken from her grandfather in her own home, then calmly flying across an ocean. Investigators pieced the crime together methodically with ballistics, computer forensics showing his disturbing searches, and travel records documenting his flight. British and American authorities coordinate quickly. An international arrest warrant is issued. He is located at his parents' home in Worksop, England, and arrested in February 2006. A lengthy extradition battle follows, but ultimately British courts rule he must face trial in Massachusetts. He is returned to the US in custody. In June 2008, after a trial that includes emotional testimony from Rachel's family and extensive forensic evidence, a Middlesex County jury convicts Neil Entwistle of 2 counts of first-degree murder, illegal possession of a firearm, and related charges. The jury rejects his claim that Rachel killed their daughter and then herself, a defense undermined by forensic evidence and the implausibility of the scenario. He receives 2 mandatory life sentences without possibility of parole. Judge Diane Kottmeyer, at sentencing, tells Entwistle his crimes defy comprehension and calls them bone-chilling. Rachel's mother, Priscilla Matarazzo, tells the court, "You took 2 beautiful lives that had just begun." As of 2025, Neil Entwistle remains incarcerated at MCI Shirley, a maximum security prison in Massachusetts, serving consecutive life sentences. He has appealed multiple times, all appeals denied. The case remains a cautionary tale in both the US and UK about the veneer of normalcy. The dangers of financial desperation, combined with easy access to firearms, and the speed at which a life can collapse into lethal violence. What compels a man to choose erasure over honesty, murder over humility? Here, toxic pride plus financial panic meets opportunistic access to a gun. The result is irreversible. In Spain, the tool is not a gun, but fire, and the science that corrects an early forensic mistake becomes the only voice left to speak for 2 lost children.
Breton has been sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder of his 2 children, Rudd and Jose, aged 6 and 2, in October 2011.
In Cordoba, Spain, in October 2011, Jose Breton takes his children, Ruth, 6, and Jose, 2, on what he tells their mother is a day outing to a park. That night, he calls police in a panic to report them missing, claiming they vanished while he was distracted. Search parties sweep the city, volunteers comb parks and riverbanks, and the nation holds its breath. Weeks later, forensic experts re-examine bone fragments recovered from a backyard bonfire at Breton's country property, a site initially cleared by investigators. The first laboratory analysis had dismissed the fragments as animal remains. The second, more thorough examination says they are human and they are children. The father becomes the prime suspect, and the case becomes a national trauma. Publicly, Jose Breton is a separated spouse locked in a bitter custody dispute with his ex-wife Ruth Ortiz. Privately, he is vindictive, controlling, and consumed by rage at losing custody battles. The case will ultimately hinge on forensic humility, the willingness of scientists to revisit an early laboratory conclusion and correct a potentially catastrophic error. The discovery of human remains transforms what began as an alleged disappearance into a premeditated double murder investigation. Born in the 1970s in Spain, Breton presents outwardly as ordinary, a man working in real estate who marries and has 2 children. The marriage deteriorates, and by 2011, the couple is separated and fighting in family court over custody. The warning signs, visible only in retrospect, are the suspicious timing and logistics of the outing on October 8, 2011, and the bonfire he lit at his rural property in Las Quemadillas on the same day. A fire, witnesses say, burned at an unusually high and sustained temperature for hours. Receipts later show he purchased large quantities of charcoal and accelerants in the days before. He also obtained sedatives. The path to the crime suggests meticulous planning, not a crime of passion or impulse. Prosecutors argue, with substantial forensic support, that José Breton sedated his children, Ruth and José, on the morning of October 8th, killed them by unknown means, likely suffocation or poisoning, methods that leave minimal trace, and then transported their bodies to his rural property, where he had prepared a bonfire capable of reaching temperatures high enough to cremate remains. He incinerated their bodies over many hours, using accelerants and sustained heat to reduce bone to fragments. He then crafted a detailed cover story about the park, reported them missing, and performed the role of distraught father for television cameras and search volunteers. The most horrifying element is the calculated scientific attempt to erase all physical trace of his children, to reduce them to ash and memory. He almost succeeds. The case turns on a second forensic examination, ordered after an anthropologist reviewing the initial report questions the conclusions. The reanalysis of all bone fragments, conducted with more sophisticated testing and greater care, identifies small cranial and dental fragments as definitively human and consistent with children of Ruth and José's ages. Additional evidence mounts. Cell phone records place Breton at the rural property during the exact window when the bonfire burned. Shopping receipts document his purchase of unusual quantities of fuel. Witness testimony describes the intensity and duration of the fire, and search of his computer reveals research into cremation temperatures and body disposal. Breton is arrested and formally charged with murder in November 2011. In July 2013, after a trial that grips Spain and sparks national conversations about gender violence and parental murder, a court in Córdoba convicts José Breton of murdering his 2 children, Ruth and José, and additional crimes against moral integrity related to the cover-up and psychological harm inflicted on their mother and family. He receives a sentence of 40 years imprisonment, effectively capped at 25 years under Spanish sentencing law at the time. The courtroom testimony is devastating. Ruth Ortiz, the children's mother, becomes a national figure and advocate against gender-based family violence. As of 2025, José Breton remains incarcerated in a Spanish prison, with his earliest potential release date reported to be in the mid-2030s, depending on behavior and legal changes. The case stands as a painful but important triumph of forensic correction over an initial error that could have let a killer go free. It also intensifies national debates in Spain about vicarious violence, a term for harm inflicted on children as a means of inflicting suffering on an ex-partner. Can science speak for the dead when a parent works methodically to silence them forever? In this case, yes, barely, and only because experts had the integrity to question their first conclusion. One more case remains. In France, 5 bodies lie wrapped and buried under a family's own patio. The father has vanished into rumor, forest, and the passage of years, leaving only questions.
Glasgow, Javier Dupont de Ligón is accused of having shot dead his wife and 4 children at their home in Nantes in 2000.
Backyard excavators lift a concrete slab in Nantes, western France, on a cold April day in 2011. Under the terrace of a modest house on Boulevard Schumann, police find bodies wrapped carefully in plastic and buried with quicklime, a substance meant to accelerate decomposition. Agnès Dupont de Ligonnès, 48, and her 4 children, Arthur, 21, Thomas, 18, Anne, 16, and Benoit, 13. Each has been shot in the head with a .22 caliber rifle, a weapon traced through inheritance records to the family. The father and husband, Xavier Pierre Marie Dupont de Ligonnès, has vanished. In the weeks before, he wrote letters to schools, employers, and family claiming the family was relocating suddenly for a new job in Australia, a fabricated story meant to buy time. He is last seen on security cameras walking into the hills of southern France, a backpack on his shoulders. A prosecutor will later call the killings 5 methodical executions, and the phrase fits the cold precision of the crime. Publicly, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès is a businessman from an aristocratic French lineage, a man who trades on family name and carefully cultivated manners. Privately, he is drowning in debt, his business ventures failing one after another, his carefully constructed image crumbling under the weight of financial reality. In early April 2011, his family disappears from their lives without warning. Days later, police responding to concerned inquiries from Agnès' family find them buried under their own terrace, executed and hidden in their own home. The case becomes one of France's most infamous unsolved mysteries because the primary suspect vanishes completely and the trail freezes despite massive investigative efforts. Born in Versailles in 1961 into a family with aristocratic pretensions, Xavier grows up in Catholic schools, absorbs the weight of family expectations, and chases business ventures that consistently fail. He presents well, articulate, educated, proper, but cannot translate social capital into financial success. By early 2011, creditors are pressing from all sides, business schemes have collapsed, and the family is on the edge of financial ruin. In the months before the murders, he acquires a .22 LR rifle and practices at a shooting range, documenting his trips. He writes meticulous administrative messages to cancel aspects of the family's life, emails to schools saying the children are withdrawing for a move abroad, messages to Agnès' employer, letters to relatives. The turning point is the methodical shutdown of every routine, every connection, every trace of ordinary life, a bureaucratic erasure that precedes physical annihilation. The crime window is narrow and precise. April 3-4-4, 2011. Investigators believe, based on forensic evidence and timeline analysis, that the victims were sedated with drugs and then shot execution style with the .22 caliber rifle as they slept, or were incapacitated one by one over the course of a night. The family's 2 Labrador retrievers are also killed, their bodies found with the family. Bodies are wrapped in plastic sheeting, carried to the backyard, and buried beneath the terrace in a grave prepared in advance. Quicklime is added to speed decomposition. The pattern is orderly annihilation within the family home, followed by an elaborate paper trail of false departures and explanations. The most disturbing element is the burial beneath the family's own feet, under the patio where they once gathered, a grotesque inversion of the home as sanctuary. The investigation is massive and international. French authorities map Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès' final movements with painstaking care. A hotel room near Toulouse, registered in a false name, ATM withdrawals showing a path south, CCTV footage at a highway toll booth capturing his car, and the last confirmed sighting on April 15th, 2011 in the Var region near Roquebrune-sur-Argent, a mountainous area along the Mediterranean coast. Surveillance footage shows him walking toward forested hills with a backpack. After that, nothing. The search extends through remote monasteries where he had connections, through caves and hiking trails, through ports and border crossings. Reported sightings come from across Europe and beyond, Scotland, the Balkans, South America, but none are confirmed. Dogs track his scent to a point in the wilderness and lose it. There is no trial, no arrest, no body, no resolution. A European arrest warrant remains active, distributed to all member states and beyond. The case becomes a media obsession in France, revisited annually on the anniversary, dissected in books and documentaries, debated endlessly, leads surface periodically and dissolve under scrutiny. In 2019, a man matching his description is briefly detained in Glasgow, Scotland, after facial recognition technology flags him at an airport, but DNA testing rules out a match. The mystery deepens rather than resolves. As of 2025, the case remains completely unresolved, one of France's most infamous open investigations. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès has not been found, alive or dead. The question of whether he died by suicide shortly after the murders, hidden in some remote location never discovered, or whether he successfully evaded capture and lives under a new identity somewhere in the world, remains unanswered. The legacies of 5 murdered family members who deserve justice and resolution, and a question mark that haunts French society and taunts investigators across a continent. What is a legacy when the primary suspect is a ghost, a rumor, a shadow in security footage walking into the hills? For the system, it is failure and frustration. For the public, it is unresolved dread. For the victims, Agnès, Arthur, Thomas, Anne and Benoit, a patio becomes both a grave and an unintended monument, a site that marks where they were stolen from the world. Across decades and continents, each father leverages proximity, trust, and authority to turn homes into killing grounds. The patterns are constant: money, control, shame, revenge, ideology. The tools vary: rifle, rope, knife, sedation, acid, fire, quicklime. Investigations answer with forensics, video, neighbors, and second looks. Some cases close in days. Others haunt the docket for years. The victims deserve names, not myths. The dead deserve clean facts, not legends. The question remains: how does intimacy become an execution chamber? If this exploration compelled you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Which case disturbed you most and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps surface future episodes that keep the focus on the victims, the facts, and the warning signs that can save lives.